There's a pattern you see over and over whenever you study ancient famines, siege warfare, frontier settlements, and, well, even Cold War contingency planning. The societies that endured hardship weren't necessarily the ones with the strongest armies or biggest stockpiles. They were the ones whose food systems were built around hardy, dependable crops that produced even when the world around them collapsed. That's why this topic matters, whether your interest comes from homesteading, history, survivalism, or simply wanting to take control of your food supply. There is nothing theoretical about it. Every time a community has been cut off from trade or blindsided by weather, the crops that kept people alive were not luxury vegetables. They were workhorses. Plants selected for their reliability, calorie density, low input requirements, and long-term storage. So, for the next few minutes, we'll break down not just which survival crops you should plant now, but why they've consistently carried civilizations through crises. And if you stick with this guide to the end, you'll walk away with an understanding that's both historical and immediately practical. No gimmicks, no doomsday theatrics, just field-tested knowledge that has kept people fed for thousands of years. Root crops remain the backbone of long-term food security. Historians studying wartime Europe, trench agriculture, and early colonial settlements all point to the same fact. When conditions turn harsh, root crops outperform nearly everything else. Potatoes, carrots, parsnips, beets and turnips keep producing even in poor soils and erratic weather. A potato bed, for example, can turn a small patch of land into a high-calorie reserve, and storing them requires nothing more complicated than a cool room or a buried pit lined with straw. If you're planting today, start with varieties known for disease resistance and long dormancy. An easy method is to dedicate one raised bed solely to root crops and stagger plantings every 2 weeks. That approach gives you harvest cycles instead of one big glut. If you're forced to live off your garden for months, staggered production really matters. Leafy greens, offer fast returns and a bit of nutrient insurance. Whenever people talk about survival crops, they usually focus on calories, but, well, micronutrients actually determine long-term resilience. That's why greens played such a huge role in naval history, frontier life, and even those W.W. Tu's victory gardens. Crops like kale, chard, mustard greens and collards, they handle cold snaps, shade, and inconsistent watering better than most plants, honestly. They're cut and come again, meaning, well, a single plant can feed you for weeks. If you're starting from scratch, sowing mixed greens densely in a shallow bed gives you harvestable food in as little as 20 to 30 days. During crises, fast-growing greens prevent the nutritional deficiencies that plagued isolated communities in the 18th and 19th centuries. Legumes provide the protein backbone that past societies relied on. Beans are, well, survival gold. Civilizations from Mesoamerica all the way to the Mediterranean leaned on legumes because, you see, they provide protein, they store well, and they enrich the soil by fixing nitrogen. When planting now, it's wise to choose hardy bush beans, cowpeas or fava beans, depending on your climate. One practical method is to establish a bean-corn-squash triad, which is inspired by traditional companion planting systems. The beans climb the corn, feed the soil, and produce shelf-stable protein. If space is tight, a single 4x4 plot planted densely with bush beans can yield pounds of dried beans for winter storage. That volume of protein can, quite frankly, completely change your food independence. Well, corn remains unmatched in calorie efficiency per square metre. Honestly, when you look at everything else, it's just hard to beat. Corn appears in nearly every long-term survival agriculture plan because it is dependable, adaptable and productive. That's why, time and again, folks turn to it when planning for the future. Indigenous groups, pioneers and early American settlers processed corn into dozens of forms: flour, meal, hominy, porridge, and relied on it as a stable foundation. It really was, and still is, a cornerstone for so many communities. If you're planting now, focus on dent or flint corn rather than sweet corn. These storage varieties grind easily and last for months. A simple strategy is to plant corn in tight blocks rather than rows. This encourages proper pollination and maximizes yield in small spaces. For anyone preparing for long-term self-reliance, storage corn is one of the highest returns you can plant. Squash and pumpkins provide long-storing, slow-energy calories. Winter squashes became survival staples across continents because, they keep for half a year without refrigeration. Thick skins protect them naturally, and just one plant can produce enough food to feed a family for weeks. If you're planting now, choose varieties known for long storage, such as Hubbard or Butternut. The key method is to give them space and feed the soil generously once, early in the season. Honestly, the plants take care of the rest. Communities living in isolation, monastic orders, mountain settlements and polar expeditions routinely packed winter squash because it resists spoilage. Your modern pantry can benefit the same way. Perennial vegetables reduce effort and guarantee continuity. Societies under siege or displacement often lost their gardens, but the people with perennial crops, plants that return year after year, had a built-in safety net. Crops like Jerusalem artichokes, rhubarb, and perennial onions quietly rebuild themselves regardless of disruptions. Jerusalem artichokes in particular are nearly impossible to kill and can produce large yields of tubers for decades. If you're aiming for resilience, designate a corner of your garden as a perennial reserve. Plant once, maintain lightly, and you have a permanent backup supply. Staple herbs ensure flavour, medicine and trade value. Herbs are often dismissed, but historically they served as medicine, currency and even preservation agents. Oregano, thyme, garlic and rosemary, for example, thrive with minimal care and provide antimicrobial properties that really mattered before refrigeration. A small herb bed, it gives you food security that goes far beyond just calories. Planting now means you'll have access to fresh seasoning and simple remedies all year round. If you want a method that always works, well, grow herbs in clay pots that can be moved indoors or outdoors as needed. These aren't trendy crops. They're the plants that carried civilizations through hardship. If you start even a small portion of these survival staples today, you're building a system that keeps producing whether supply lines are smooth or chaotic. If this guide gave you solid value, make sure to subscribe to Hydrohaven and share it so more people can build real resilience into their gardens.